Episode 559 of 360 Wrestling Fanatic. I'll be talking all about tonight's go-home episode of WWE Monday Night RAW before this Saturday's Elimination Chamber Premium Live event. All that and more right here, right now. 360 Wrestling Fanatic. Hello, Wrestling Fanatics. Welcome to tonight's episode of 360 Wrestling Fanatic on this Monday night. Lance Brock here. Tonight, going to be talking all about tonight's WWE Monday Night RAW, which was the go-home episode of RAW before this Saturday's Elimination Chamber Premium Live event. And after I recap Raw, I'll see if there is any big news going on in the world of pro wrestling to talk about. But before I get into the Raw recap, I do have a big major announcement to make right here on 360 Wrestling Fanatic tonight. Well, actually, maybe a big major announcement might be overselling it just a little bit. But the announcement I do want to make right now is that 360 Wrestling Podcast is now on Threads. So, if you have a Threads page, or whatever it's called, on the app, whatever you want to call it, and you want to follow 360 Wrestling Podcast, you can. It's the same as the Instagram, just 360 Wrestling Podcast is that simple. So, once again, if you have a Threads page, feel free to follow 360 Wrestling Podcasts if you want, or if not, that's fine too. But now, let's get into tonight's episode and talk about tonight's Monday Night RAW. RAW was live from the Honda Center in Anaheim, California. Our commentators tonight, Michael Cole and Pat McAfee. I'm sure if you're a regular listener of 360 Wrestling Fanatic, you know that I am not a big fan of Pat McAfee. But unfortunately, have to put up with him every week. And on Raw tonight, Drew McIntyre defeated Cody Rhodes. And in a women's elimination chamber qualifying last chance battle royal, we saw the return of Raquel Rodriguez. She enters this battle royal, wins it, and she will now be in the Women's Elimination Chamber match this Saturday at the Elimination Chamber PLE in Perth, Australia. And the Judgment Day, Finn Balor, Damian Priest, Dirty Dom, Dominic Mysterio, and J.D. McDonough defeated the Awesome Truth, The Miz and R-Truth, and DIY, Johnny Gargano and Tommaso Ciampa in an 8-man tag team match. And then after the match, the Judgment Day left R-Truth laying in a post-match beatdown. Chad Gable defeated Ivar. And in the main event, the WWE Intercontinental Championship was on the line. The Ring General Gunther defending against main event Jey Uso. I just want to say, to start things off, that I thought this was actually quite a surprising main event. Really good match here tonight, and it looked like Jey Uso was about to become the new Intercontinental Champion, ending this historic reign from Gunther. He had about 4 or 5 spears, and then the Uso splash. Looked like he was just about to get the 3 count, get the victory, become the new WWE Intercontinental Champion. But then all of a sudden, we hear the bell start ringing. The camera cuts to the ringside area, and we see somebody in a hoodie ringing the bell. And it is none other than the brother of Jey Uso, Jimmy Uso, ringing the bell. So, of course, that causes a distraction. And then while that is going on, Gunther is able to get the win over Jey Uso and retain the Intercontinental Championship. And then Jimmy gets in the ring and beats down his brother. And that was tonight's episode of WWE Monday Night RAW. I thought it was a pretty good episode. I don't know if I would say it was real great, but it definitely wasn't a bad one either. As far as being a go-home show, I thought it was alright. And I would recommend, if you missed Raw tonight, definitely worth checking it out. And just another reminder, this Friday, SmackDown is pre-taped since Saturday morning. Here in the United States anyway, Eastern Time, SmackDown will be starting at 5 a.m. And if you're on the West Coast, I feel sorry for you, because it will be starting at 2 a.m. on the West Coast. So you're probably going to want to get some sleep during the afternoon, since going to have to stay up till 2 a.m. to watch it. And of course, we have all the other shows taking place this weekend. We have TNA No Surrender, New Japan Pro Wrestling New Beginning in Sapporo, and Friday night, the regularly scheduled shows, SmackDown and Rampage, and Saturday, Collision is going to be back on at its regular night and time. Also, I didn't mention this during the Raw recap, mainly just because I didn't think it was important at all. But there was some guy from UFC in the audience. I don't remember what his name was, and it doesn't matter. But he called out some other UFC guy. Also doesn't matter what his name was either. Unfortunately, I think we're going to see a lot of this, where with TKO, there might be some crossover with WWE and that boring UFC that I do not care at all about. There's a long time ago I have tried to watch not just UFC, but other MMA promotions as well. Bellator, and I can't think of the other one. That one, it was, I can't think, or King of the Cage, or maybe. But I've tried watching MMA, just cannot get into it. It's just too boring. So I hope there isn't too much crossover between WWE and UFC. I know Matt Riddle was in UFC before, and also Filthy Tom Lawler, but UFC's just terrible. Just keep it away from pro wrestling. And yes, Ken Shamrock, another legend in the business who was in the UFC, and Dan Severn, I know, but still, I just rather just watch pro wrestling. Forget that boring MMA nonsense. And some good news, actually. Steve Mongo McMichael, who was a WCW commentator and actually a member of the Four Horsemen at one time, is doing better now after recovering from an MRSA infection. Steve McMichael has had some health issues as of late, dealing with MLS, so hopefully recovery for Steve McMichael. And some other news, Nick Nemeth versus Speedball Mike Bailey has been announced for Josh Barnett's Bloodsport 10, which I have to admit, out of all the shows that take place WrestleMania weekend, that is probably my least favorite, because going back to the MMA discussion, that's one of the shows that's treated more like an MMA show, supposed to be unscripted or whatever, and that, to be honest, is why I'm just not a fan of it. But I would say Dolph Ziggler, there I go messing his name up again, Nick Nemeth versus Speedball Mike Bailey would be an entertaining match to see, though. I definitely recommend that one. WrestleMania weekend. And some more quick news. Gabe Kidd has been pulled from the Rev Pro show coming up due to injuries sustained in the cage match at the New Beginning in Osaka show. And now that is about all of the news I have for this episode of the podcast. Once again, thank you everyone for listening tonight. And remember, as always, in the comment section, you can leave your thoughts and your opinions on tonight's episode of WWE Monday Night RAW. And not only that, but you can also leave your predictions for all the shows taking place this weekend, whether it's New Japan Pro Wrestling New Beginning in Sapporo, TNA No Surrender, the Elimination Chamber, or any of the regularly weekly shows taking place this weekend. Once again, that's in the comment section, either right here on Spreaker, YouTube, or wherever you listen to 360 Wrestling Podcasts app. Also, before I wrap up this episode of the podcast, just remember one thing. Like I said at the top of the podcast, and that is that 360 Wrestling Podcast is now available on Threads. Same as Instagram, 360 Wrestling Podcast. So if you have a Threads page, go and check out 360 Wrestling Podcasts if you want. Anybody can follow. Well, once again, that is all for tonight's episode of 360 Wrestling Fanatic 559. I will be back in the morning to talk pro wrestling with everyone once again. So hope everyone listening right now will join me in the morning. And until then, I am Lance, and I am a wrestling fanatic.